After the overwhelming popularity of our Gameboy Advance SP with the analog stick, we took on the feedback from our viewers and decided to create a large screen Gameboy Advance SP. The initial plan was that we would use the internals and the 4.2-inch LCD backlit screen from a DSi XL console. As our 3D printer hasn't worked for some time now, we decided to create the basic externals of the shell using leftover Gameboy Advance SP parts. The externals of the DSi XL screen were measured and pieces from the upper screen of a Gameboy Advance SP were used. These pieces were glued together using epoxy and reinforced with leftover mesh from 3D printing parts. Once a basic outline was created for the front half of the top of the screen, we then focused our attention on creating the rear of the front half of the screen. This involved cutting pieces from the original top of a SP shell and mounting them together, just as we did for the front half of the shell. If you think this sounds confusing, well, it sure is. However, we had no other alternative at this stage. So we continued to soldier on and cut up pieces from leftover SP shells and epoxy them together. Once we were satisfied with the overall form and fitment of the top half of the shell, we decided to block sand it over and over again for a smooth finish before we hit it with its first coat of primer. After the first coat of primer, we were happy with the overall finish and then focused our attention on the back of the front half of the shell. As per the front half of the shell, we gave the top half of the shell the similar treatment, filling in all the crevices with epoxy resin and sanding it back for a smooth finish. The next step was just to hit it with one coat of primer filler. We ended up giving the top halves of the shell 2 coats of primer filler, as we were going to use a metallic black gloss paint which would show every imperfection, as we wanted the shell to have a factory finished look. Pleased with the finish of the top half of the shell, we then focused our attention on creating the bottom half of the shell. We wanted the console to look uniform and aligned, so we extended the width of the bottom of the shell. This would also help accommodate the DSi XL Internals. As per the top half of the shell, we epoxied the bottom half of the shell together. Using slow set epoxy to bind the 2 surfaces ensures a strong finish and fills in all gaps. With the top half of the bottom shell now complete, we hit it with 2 coats of primer filler. We then focus our attention on block sanding the bottom half of the shell and filling in any imperfections. To ensure a superior finish, before laying the black base coat, we decided to fill in any additional minor imperfections with Bondo. Once the Bondo dried, we sanded it once again and hit it with primer filler. The shell would now be wiped down with grease and wax remover and ready for its first 2 coats of gloss metallic black paint. After laying 2 coats of metallic gloss black paint, the finish was incredible and looked almost factory. With no minor imperfections showing, we then focused our attention on spraying the rest of the shell. Once pleased with the externals, we then focused our attention on removing the internals from a DSi XL console, which would somehow be placed into this fabricated shell. The first part of the build would be somehow mounting the 4.2-inch LCD screen into the console. This would involve modifying a ribbon cable to fit. Once satisfied with the modified ribbon cable, we then focus our attention on stripping the DSi XL motherboard down to its bare minimum and removing all unnecessary components. We then proceeded to mounting the LCD screen to the newly fabricated shell and test fitting the internals before mounting the remaining components into the shell. As we wanted this console to look as close to factory SP as possible, we used an original non-functional, non-repairable baseboard for the directional buttons and soldered all the electronics from the DSi board to the Gameboy Advance SP board. So after weeks in production, we finally finished our Gameboy Advance SP XL. The console features a metallic black finish with Charizard on the top half of the shell. Tactile clicky trigger buttons are located on the rear of the shell, as well as a modernised USB-C charging port. The sides of the shell feature volume control and tactile power button. And after a lot of fabrication and trimming, we managed to keep the original DSi internals and the original DS cartridge slot. We stayed true to the aesthetics of the original Gameboy Advance SP console, however adding modern features. With the shell measuring just over 4 inches in diameter, the console feels more comfortable when playing with adult hands. This console is also capable of playing all your favourite single-screen DS games, such as Castlevania, Chrono Trigger, Tetris, and Mortal Kombat, just to name a few. With flashed firmware, the console is also capable of playing all your favourite Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Sega Master System, Sega Mega Drive, and Atari 2600 games. Enjoyed this video? Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our other videos. Stay tuned for our next crazy Game Boy Advance SP build.